Hello. Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing out there? Everyone's got things are going to be good. Cool. Well, welcome to Chicago, everyone, and to the 2015 Public Art and Placemaking Pre-Conference. I am Patricia Walsh, the Public Art Programs Manager here at Americans for the Arts, and your guide for the pre-conference. Before we begin, I'd like to take this time to thank those who helped make this pre-conference possible: the Americans for the Arts Board of Directors, the Local Host Committee and the City of Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, Americans for the Arts staff, the exhibitors, you guys, the Public Art Network Council, and pre-conference committee who really stepped up to the plate this year to make this public art conference happen for you. Can I get the council and the committee members to stay so we can all recognize you? Thank you, guys, and they are your connections to the national public art scene, so please introduce yourself to them throughout the conference. And of course, I want to thank all of you for attending and for the work you do day in and day out to connect with your communities through public art. This next day and a half is for you to network with colleagues, hear from others in the field, and learn about work happening around the country. In assembling this pre-conference, there were two goals: one, to celebrate the work that has happened and continues to happen, and to start a dialogue as to where we want this field to go in the future. To accomplish this morning you'll hear from the 2015 PAN Award winner, the Association of Public Art, represented by Executive Director Penny Bulkenbach, and then from our three jurors for the 2015 Public Art Network Year in Review. This afternoon, you'll have the opportunity to explore Chicago through 6 different tours, and then rejoin back here for our concurrent sessions to discuss a range of topics pertinent to the public art field today, including cultural equity, managing change in your programs and leadership, participate in the next stage of developing professional standards for the field, or talk about the process and impact of artist-led placemaking projects. As a capstone to this pre-conference, we'll hear from our keynote speaker, landscape architect come public artist, Walter Hood. And for tomorrow, after you have the opportunity to connect with experts in the field through our roundtables, we will end with a session from 4 amazing and unique public artists and hear a take on their work and how they see the role of artists may or may not change as we move forward in this field. One housekeeping note: sign up for the public art tours will take place this afternoon after the year in review, just outside in the foyer. Again, the sign up for the tours will take place after the year in review presentation right outside in the foyer. The next day and a half is for you guys. All of you are out there working hard for your communities. I know the public art field has unique challenges that all of you rise above each and every day. I know this because it shines through the public art works you make happen. I know this because I hear it from others. Early this year, I attended an international meeting between transportation engineers and planners, and though there were public art administrators represented in the room from the MTA in New York and LA Metro, to name a few, it was the engineers who, in the end, were advocating for the public art in their projects. That is where you guys are taking the field. Those working with you on your projects are now some of your biggest supporters. In Madison, Wisconsin, when a public art work became the lightning rod for the homeless situation in their city, it was a prominent community member who stepped up and deterred the conversation. In Western Virginia, I met a private developer working on projects designed to change the face of their town center, who is passionate about public art and is finding ways to get into his projects. This is the work you are doing, and thank you. I thank you from Americans for the Arts and from your communities who you are out there making healthier and more whole with each project that you create. This next day and a half is for you. The programming and events, all of it. I hope you connect and have some fun. This evening we'll have a great pre-conference party planned for you at the Chicago Cultural Center. And for you night owls, please join us for the popular 5 and 5 presentation, which I hear is supposed to be absolutely fun and amazing. Looking at you, Renee. Thank you all for being here. Up next, we're going to hear from people who help make this pre-conference possible. Up first, one of the 3 will be the Public Art Network Council member and pre-conference committee chair, John Pounds, who's director of the Chicago Public Art Group. Then we'll hear from Jimmy LaFleur, the Public Art Network chair and director for the Public Art Program. We'll hear from our local host connection, Wendy Miller, creator of public art for the city. Department of Cultural Affairs. So without further ado, I think we're going to hear from Jimmy first. Thank you. Oh, no, wait, hold on. John just walked in. So we're going to hear from John first.
I'd say that's the trouble with being a Chicagoan is like you get caught up in traffic and a little late, except other folks are here from Chicago on time. Good morning, everyone. It's a delightful thing for me personally to have the Public Art Network in Chicago. I found the network to be a really inspiring connection to work citywide, statewide, countrywide. As we have met to talk, to show, to laugh, we are still looking for jokes, to think about how public art has transformed lives and communities has really been an extraordinary passion for me, and it's been a real gift for me. I hope that you will get that gift as well. You all deserve it. Thank you for coming to Chicago. If you have questions, there's a lot of us who love the city, and we'll be happy to answer them, probably with more words than you necessarily want, but that we will be happy to share everything that we can about the city that we love. Thank you for coming.
Now here's Jimmy LaFleur, your PAN Chair Council and the Program Director for the City of San Antonio.
Thank you. We're going to keep it simple, keep it brief this morning. We have a lot of presentations. In between those times is when it's a network, which is why we're all here together in person. I think for those of you who come frequently, you're familiar with the Public Art Network, you're familiar with the PAN Council process, but just to, for those of you who are not, PAN Council is nominated by the AFTA members and elected by the AFTA members, and we are here, we work very closely with Patricia and the entire Americans for the Arts organization to work on projects and to work on programs throughout the year. We meet very frequently as a group. We work very effectively to kind of foster that teamwork that actually happens very effectively here when we're all gathered together. This year, our group has really focused on some key areas that we'd like to see some progress, and they're somewhat interweaved into the agenda that we're going to be taking part and leading off today, and that includes a focus on regional networks. We had organic start to this morning about regional networks, and we hope that that actually starts to become a discussion point throughout the 2 days, because we really think that at a national level we do a great job at surveying, but there's so much that needs to be said between the different cities that are neighboring cities and the staff that can help support with artists that are kind of in common, that are going to be doing commissions in your area. So in addition to focus, also the best practices and standards for practices, something we've worked hard, and there's going to be a great session by led by others, our vice chair this year, Sarah Odenkirk, who's done a terrific job with that. So please take note of that. And then also just improving the resources that we have, the blogs, the webinars, the conferences, there's surveys. Please take note of all of them, because a lot of great work has been put into them by the fellow PAN Council that is here, and we really hope to work as ambassadors. See somebody who's got a council member tag on their nameplate, please go up and introduce yourself and ask any questions. With that, I will pass it on to Wendy.
Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to have this opportunity to welcome you to the 2015 Americans for the Arts Public Art Pre-Conference. On behalf of the City of Chicago, I extend a heartfelt hello. We're so happy that you're all here. This is the first time that the AFTA conference has ever landed in Chicago, and we could not be more excited to host you here in our metropolis on the prairie, with its mountainous skyscrapers, storied river, and miles upon miles of neighborhoods fertile with culture. And what a meaningful topic that convenes us all for this pre-conference. By its nature, public art has unique significance for the diverse publics who create it and experience it. And I find one common thread across public art's myriad possibilities and definitions to be the notion of storytelling, context of a site, allowing histories to remain alive and relevant. Public art can ground the creative process with which communities and civic practices imagine and invest in the stories of our future. Public art can, by design, invent new perspectives of how we experience the public realm in the present, leaving stories behind of happenings shared by those who encountered their temporariness. I hope your stay in Chicago is rich with stories, those you hear, those you share, and those we create together. Continue mapping the terrain. Here in Chicago, exploring the origins of community engagement in Bronzeville, Hyde Park, and Little Village. Strolling through Millennium Park, the new 606 Bloomingdale Trail, or the Riverwalk. Checking out the electric and vibrant street art that increasingly emerges across Chicago, from Rogers Park to Logan Square to Pilsen and beyond. Here in Chicago, experiencing the aesthetics and intentionality of the work led by Theaster Gates Rebuild Foundation in the numerous Dorchester projects. Discovering the community of the future in Bridgeport along the shores of what was once called Bubbly Creek. Traversing the city by L, no doubt, or participating in Spencer Tunick's giant nude photo shoot of AFTA Public Art pre-conference attendees in front of a cloud gate. That last one hasn't actually been scheduled, but anything is possible, and the best stories are unexpectedly. I welcome you all to have grand fun exploring the Windy City, the city of big shoulders, the city in a garden, sweet home Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for that amazing welcome. And up next, we'll hear from Bob Lynch, President and CEO of Americans for the Arts.
You know, it occurs to me that the lectern should probably be on the other side as each one of us makes the trek up here. I want to just say thanks for you all being here and welcome to all of you. It's exciting to see so many people, and I'm your biggest consumer because I spend most of my time on the road traveling across America, and you are America's museum. I get to see pieces in airports and cities and small towns everywhere, and it's exciting and energizing. So I thank you all for that. I love and always have loved spectacle and scale, and that's probably why I love public art. Some of you know I was a survivor of the original Woodstock. Anyone else? There's fewer and fewer. Hey, there you go, man. I love that. Oh, yes, I remember that. What I want to say is that that was spectacle, that was scale. What a lot of people don't remember or don't know is that everywhere there were visual things, like, for example, aerial art with big peace signs in smoke in the sky. And I got hooked on spectacle and scale because of that. And then later working on festivals, I got excited what a festival could do. Wendy was talking about happenings, for example, or the feeling of happening and temporariness. And so that work led to working with artists like Otto Pine, for example, who would make inflatables about the size of a third of this room and then suddenly we would have worked on it for months, as all of you do, but suddenly it would appear transforming a spot, sometimes on a university campus that wasn't ready for it, and administrators looking out and wondering what happened. Isn't that the great kind of feeling that you all want to have sometimes as you work with managers? So what I'm excited about is that we're here in Chicago, first time, as was said, and yet I've loved this city and the architecture in the city and the public art in the city, and also the story of public art. Struggle with acceptance of a piece, like the Picasso piece that we all learned over the years. Techniques to work on having public art accepted and then beloved space. Public art and placemaking have a real role in driving many aspects of the rest of the work of Americans for the Arts. For example, tourism. So destination, when I go to places, I see that mayors love public art because it makes their place more attractive. Tourism directors love public art because it makes more people come to the place, and the place is more interesting, or it makes it defined in some way as that particular location. We have to tell that story again and again and again to show people in one town why what we do is valuable because it's worked in another town. And that's part of what my job is, to be out there working with those non-art sectors. Artists are critical to the process, and there's many artists here. The artist-manager partnership is critical as it contributes to making a better community, making more economic contribution, and just making more joy in the lives of the people. I thank the Public Art Network for the hard work in supporting the artists and the administrators through field education, through networking, through coming up with new opportunities, through resource development, all of the things that we work on at Americans for the Arts all the time. In this nationwide museum that I love, I get to see things that are, like, for example, the floors, many times, the floors of the airport in Miami. I know them all now. And so I look down when I go to Miami. But in Orlando, the big, large-scale murals. So I look up when I'm in the Orlando airport. Or the, I think John talked about, sometimes it's about jokes. And so me as my friend Craig Nutt, some of you may have worked with him, and his giant wooden ear of corn that's in the Atlanta airport. Or just the joy of stumbling across something like Janet Eckelman's giant that are strung between buildings in Boston. And when I see something like that, and I don't know who it is, I have the best, I mentioned to the PAM committee yesterday, I have the best app in the world. I call Patricia, or text her, and she tells me what it is and why I should love it. And so what we are doing at Americans for the Arts in the next couple of years is using a theme about transforming America's communities through the arts, to get people to understand that we're about the arts, but we're also about transformation, and that the arts linked with all of these other things, economy or community or placemaking, is a great future for support for the arts and support for public art. And at the core of that is public art. The transformation of American community through public art is what I'm excited about, and I'm excited to be here with you. So I thank Patricia, I thank the PAM Council and Jimmy, and I hope you have a fabulous couple of days. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. So we're just going to roll right into our next session, and now we're going to hear and celebrate the PAN Award in Leadership. To introduce the award, I present John Hayworth. He is a board of directors for the American for the Arts and liaison to the PAN Council. And when we don't keep him busy, he's actually the director for the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. John?
Thank you so much. And I just want to do another shout out for Patricia and for Bob Lynch and everyone on the AFTA staff for everything they've done for our field. Everyone, a big round of applause for them. I have served on the AFTA board for many years, and I love this organization, and I've learned so much. But I'll tell you, serving as the board's liaison to the PAN Council is where I really learn the most, learn new things, see imagination and stories in play, and see communities transformed. And it's a huge honor for me, and I'm indebted to everybody for that. The PAN is a really big deal. This is an award that is grounded on peer recognition. It's an award that recognizes the work of all of us. It's a major honor for achievement of distinction. It represents the highest and the absolute best practices of the public art field. Our past awardees have included major artists of great distinction and public arts administrators. This year's awardee inspires all of us and celebrates the work that everyone in this room does. And I have the honor of introducing the presenter of that award, Renee Pachowski. And she told me a story this morning. I won't get into the details of that. But last night, she had a major dream about a colleague who got huge recognition. And I thought, what a perfect lead-in for this. Renee has served on the PAN Council, and in fact, her term ends this year, so she's leaving the council for now, but I know she's going to continue working with us. She was in a staff capacity working as the first PAN Council director. She is the person for public art in Pittsburgh and the region. She told me, her, what is the essence of your job? She said, it is to build capacity and systems for public art, and she does this everywhere she goes. She serves the field herself with distinction, with passion, with humor, and with great competence. And it's my honor to introduce her, and she will introduce this year's awardee. Thank you, Renee.
Okay, so the dream was that on my staff was Miss Pennsylvania. No pressure to get dressed every morning. So anyway, it gives me incredible pleasure to present the 2015 PAN Award to the Association for Public Art. They are the nation's first private nonprofit organization dedicated to integrating public art and urban planning. They were founded in 1872, and the association commissions, preserves, promotes, and interprets public art in Philadelphia. Despite their Philadelphia focus, this organization is a national and international leader in the field of public art. They have influenced the development of site-specific public art, the role that communities play in selecting artists, the importance of conservation and maintenance of works of art as a function of public art organizations, and the absolute need for creative educational programs and materials as a way to connect with local, national, and international communities. Since it's Throwback Thursday, I'd like to highlight some of their accomplishments since 1872. They were the organization that established the Municipal Art Gallery, which was a forerunner to a little organization called the Philadelphia Museum of Art. They collaborated with urban planners and designers to create the Ben Franklin Parkway in 1929. So Patricia, very interesting to hear about your transportation meeting. We can thank the Association for Public Art for paving the way to that. That was funny. And the establishment of 3 outdoor sculpture exhibitions in 1933, 1940, and 1949. Zip a little forward to present day influences that they've had on the field. They initiated form and function. inviting artists such as Martin Puryear, who created this, and Jody Pinto to create site-specific utilitarian and projects that were integral to community life. That was in 1980. Seminal projects such as this one by Fingerspan Bridge by Jody Pinto in 1987 were commissioned through this program. Which one of us has not shown one of these works in a slideshow on the history of public art? In 1982, they initiated the Outdoor Sculpture Conservation Program, the first of the United States. Would Save Outdoor Sculpture, which was founded in 1989, have existed without this precedent? I think important for us at this gathering, they organized Public Art America 1987, which was the first national conference to examine public art. Would we be here today at a PAN gathering if it wasn't for that tradition of getting us all together to network and drink and have fun? In 1998, they initiated New Landmarks, which was probably the subject of at least 5 sessions here at past PAN conferences. This innovative flipped the paradigm of how public art commissioned by starting with a call for communities to participate in the program, then followed by a call for artists where those communities participated in the selection process. This program also changed the way many of us think about communities, helping to reframe it as a group of people with a shared denominator beyond a zip code. What else do we have in common, and how do those communities get formed? And in 2010, they launched Museum Without Walls, which is one of the most successful and informative interpretive programs in our field. I certainly think, and the PAN Council voted for this, that the Association for Public Art really deserves to be recognized for 143 years of great work. Please join me in thanking current staff, consultant, and interns. We all know it takes a whole staff to do this. This is some of their past staff and interns since 1983. They will be embodied today by Penny Balkenbach, who's going to join us on the stage. But I also want to ask Laura and Hope, who are here, who are colleagues of Penny's, to stand up as Penny takes the stage, because they certainly have contributed greatly to Association for Public Art winning this award as well. So Penny, come get your star. Miss Pennsylvania, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let me just get my technology working. Great. Well, first of all, I have so many thanks to make, and this doesn't count for my 23 minutes of talking to you, in my view. But on behalf of our village, really, that is the Association for Public Art, I really want to thank the PAN Council. I have served on the council for 2 terms, and I know what a great job they do. So this is especially a wonderful honor. Thank you so much. To the Americans for the Arts, our entire board, staff who couldn't come are so excited about this recognition. Thank you, Renee. We go back, way back. And one day I think I'll be handing you an award, and I'll hold it up as high. And Patricia, about what I might say to you today that would be something that really is unique to my organization, that could frame the work that we've done over such a long time. I'm so honored to work for an organization that has so many precedents. And it seemed almost obvious that I should talk about this legacy that we have, this unique 140-plus year history. It's a living legacy. It's also my personal history. And it occurred to me that it's your history as well. And that's what I want to share with you. I think that knowing our public art history, however brief program or however long, really gives you clarity It gives you credibility. It helps you find your collaborators, and it gives you a lot of clout. So if you don't have a long public art history, we're very happy to share ours with you today. And I want to introduce you to our collective founders, our heroes. Not as nostalgia. I want to be really careful not to get nostalgic about this, especially listening yesterday to some of the challenges that we face. However, I think that when I introduce you to our leaders, I think what I want to talk about is that their future is our present. And after listening yesterday to the idea about, the future of public art, I really wonder what they would think of us today. I wonder if they would think that we met their expectations. Okay. So who were these civic-minded people who found what was then the Fairmount Park Artists Association in 1872 that was uniquely related to art and planning? This was, interestingly, a citizens' movement. It was not a government program. And it's a distinction, really, that we hold to this day. We're actually a membership organization, so we have a lot of people and muscle behind us and a very kind of diverse audience that work. Henry Fox and Charles Howell, pictured here, when in their early 20s, I don't have a photograph of them when they were in their early 20s. I don't think photography was invented then. But and they were probably less bearded, but when they were in their 20s, they enticed a group of trustees from all walks of life. And at the time in the 19th century, they were immigrant, they were native-born, they were merchants, entrepreneurs, lawyers, the first director of the museum school, which now is the University of the Arts, and collectors as well. And they had this common belief that placing works of art in public spaces would enable people of all classes to share equally in a public trust. And these were the kind of words that they used. So it's pretty amazing when I think about, a lot of our initiatives today. So the title of this is Then and Now, and I have a lot of slides, and I'll, from here on in, try to talk really quickly so I can share some really interesting images with you. So, some 30 years later came my heroine, Ellen Phillips Samuel. She was a woman from a public-spirited philanthropic. She was active member in our organization, but she was not on the board because the board was male. So she had to join the Women's Committee. When she died in 1913, we became her beneficiary of her residuary estate, which is said to have been at the time just about the largest bequest municipal endeavor of its kind. Now, she left us with a couple of directives. I'll mention two of them because they're really extraordinary. One was that when she gave us the funds, she said that we couldn't spend the principal, we could only spend the interest. So guess what? I'm here today because this woman in 1907 said, I'm going to give you this money, but you can't spend it all. And so over the years, this fund has increased, and we're one of the few organizations of our type that actually has an endowment. So we raise funds for all of our special projects, but unlike many of you, I have to say, fortunately for us, we're not worried about how we're going to operate. And so this organization, at 140 years, it's going to be going for another 140 because of the way that we were set up. Secondly, she asked that the association, after she died in 1913, would put ads in newspapers around the world, no internet, to attract this wide range of artists who might be commissioned to create new work for Fairmount Park. And what amazing foresight to have the notion that you would like scan the creative ideas all over the world and then bring people to Philadelphia. And that actually created those 3 exhibitions that Renee referred to in 1933, 1940, and 1949. And the idea was to gather all of these artworks by invitation and really expose the community of Philadelphia and actually the national community to people working in the 3rd dimension. Now, few people know that the percent for art programs as we know them today in the United States were actually instigated by artists. And in 1957, there was a lawyer in Philadelphia by the name of Raymond Spicer. Interestingly, his father was a lawyer who represented Brancusi and all of those is this art stuff that Brancusi faced. But Ray Spicer inherited his father's curiosity, and he took on Artist Equity, which still exists, I think, in some form, as a pro bono client. And this is in the 50s. And at the end of his artist clients, he asked Lou Kahn, the architect Lou Kahn, to join him in a mission to try to create a percent for art idea in Philadelphia. And he asked Lou to join him to go visit a man by the name of Michael van Moosisker, who was a lawyer and a writer. And they invited Michael to have cocktails at the Philadelphia College of Art. And in his memoirs, Michael van Moosisker wrote, "I had no idea why they wanted to see me for cocktails. Why would, these 2 people want to take me out for a drink?" Wait, is this, I think, yes. Oh, so this is Michael van Moosisker. And he was then the chairman of Philadelphia's Redevelopment Authority. And Spicer and Kahn convinced him of the merits of setting aside funding for new development for fine arts. And in 1950, he was a writer. He made this sort of open call to the Conference of Editorial Writers who had convened in Philadelphia and had this manifesto that said, percent for art. And within a year, he actually created the legislation, well, actually it's a regulation for the Redevelopment Authority's percent. So it's an amazing story. But at the same time, the artist Benton Spruance, who was a printmaker and actually didn't necessarily stand to gain personally in any of all of this, president of Artist Equity, and he enlisted the help of a friend, Joseph Greenberg, who was a sculptor who did benefit in the end. And they approached a man by the name of Henry Sawyer, who was a lawyer and a city councilman and also a member of our board. And as you might imagine, all these guys knew one another. And this is my other hero, Henry Sawyer. And evidently, Henry Sawyer had for some time tried to introduce the percent legislation to city council, and he just couldn't get any traction on it. And finally, he decided that he was not going to be in public service any longer. He actually became a civil rights lawyer. And so when he finished his term, he went into the very last session of city council, and the council surprised him and passed this ordinance. And he told me that he always thought of it as his going away present. So can you imagine that, this legislation that governs probably more than half of the people in the room actually was a gift to Henry Sawyer. It's really a great lesson on how artists can get something to stick in city government. So my personal inspiration comes from Marcel Duchamp. I'm not sure how many of you know that he believed that the audience completes of art. We've all been talking about this, we think about this, but in the 50s, Duchamp gave this lecture called The Creative Act. He issued this very famous statement which said that the creative act is not performed by the artist alone, The spectator brings the work in contact with the external world and thus adds his own contribution to the creative act. And this came during the time that he had told everybody that he was no longer making art, but he was secretly creating this final work on the right called Le Temps Donné, which, and when he died, he left a manuscript that basically gave the instructions for how to create that work, which in the end came to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But it can only be viewed by, for lack of a better word, looking into a peephole, which creates this sense of intimate complicity and really does stand for this idea that were it not for the viewer, the artwork basically would not exist. And of course, I again want to thank our current APA staff, small in number, but really with incredible ability. Laura Griffith, where are you? There she is, who's been the assistant director for many, many years. We love working together. And Nora Sutherland, where are you, Nora? There. Nora is our newest staff person, and she's working in development for us, because we're really greedy. All of our endowment isn't enough to do all the things that we want to do. So thank you for joining us. The other people who couldn't make it today are Susan Myers, who's our public art program manager, Caitlin Martin, who does our media and communications, who I think a lot of, Ashley Lipolis, assistant, and Ginger Osborne, our very long-term office manager. And as you saw, we have tons of interns who have over the years worked with us and who've gone on, as it turns out, to very important jobs, either within city government or in other places around the country. But before us, earlier still, the Philadelphia story begins with the artist William Rush. And he was called the father of American sculpture in his own lifetime, but because he made this transition from being a craftsman to sculptor. He began by carving ship's figures on the prows of boats, and then he ended up being the first American sculptor, to my knowledge, who was commissioned to do a work in a public space. And here he is, there is on the left his sculpture Water Nymph and Bittern, and on the right, interestingly, is his plan for Franklin Square. And so this whole idea that artists might be involved more than just the artwork, but really in designing public spaces, has this antecedent from 1824 when William Rush already did it. He had a concern for civic improvements. He worked on public monuments. He made these wonderful park plans. He collaborated with architects and engineers. Importantly, he was an artist who was really daring. And I think all of those anticipated future directions for our organization and laid the groundwork, I think, for our evolution and also for public art in general. So Rush's Water Nymph and Bittern was installed at the city's then geographic center. And it's viewed on the left. In 1809 was America's first decorative fountain built with public funds. At least I think it is until someone tells me otherwise. And here we have it, public art as a nexus for gathering. Is that placemaking? Probably. However, interestingly, another thing that dogs us a lot is that some people at the time evidently objected fiercely to the revealing and clinging drapery of the nymph that was on display in the city center. And it really was the linking of public art and controversy began way back then. It turned out that Rush's model was apparently a socially prominent woman, and she created a scandal when she posed nude. So later, on the right, Thomas Eakins painted Rush carving, but he put on the right someone who he referred to as a knitting chaperone. It's intended to both restore Rush's and the model's reputations. So I have little jokes, not big ones. Community engagement, not a new idea, colleagues. Emmanuel Fremier's Joan of Arc was commissioned by the association in collaboration with the French community to celebrate their centennial in 1890. And this started our tradition of collaboration, working with the city, working with community groups. This dedication was conducted in French and in English. They commissioned special music for the event. And today, as we engage and re-engage in many different ways with communities, an example here is a rededication of a Nandi, which is a sacred bull from India, when the Indian community together for this occasion. Well, I want to talk about funding a little bit. You've heard a little bit about ours, but following the assassination of President McKinley in 1901, our newspaper, the Enquirer, asked people to send in $1 bills, and they collected $50,000 to create this monument to McKinley. So it was called public subscription, and that was how it was paid. Sort of, they made it in a way. And also in Philadelphia, there's a monument to John Wanamaker, who was a mercantile guy, where school children donated $50,000 in pennies in 1901 to build this monument to John Wanamaker. And of course, the models have changed over the years. This on the right is Klaus Oldenburg's early design for what is now his famous clothespin. So it's your monument. Frederick Remington's 1908 cowboy, which is on the left, tucked into the landscape, I think is one of the earliest documented examples of site-specific sculpture, because we know the day that Remington came to Philadelphia to position a horse and rider right on that location so that it overlooked the river. And it also had a connection to local history, because his model was a man by the name of Charlie Trigo, who grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but who had become the manager of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. So Remington, who was very involved with, the West, brought Charlie Trigo in to be the model for that piece. But you can see the integration of the piece in the landscape is obviously something that I tried to achieve over time in many different ways. And that Martin Puryear's pavilion that Renee mentioned earlier really follows in that tradition. In that project, it was a 60-foot walkway that led across a natural and that created this beautiful observation platform, but it also put everybody among the treetops for a bird's eye view because of how it was sited at that particular location. So opportunities for women making large-scale sculptures were very limited in the 19th and 20th centuries, but the association commissioned Beatrice Fenton's Seaweed Girl Fountain in 1920, and that, of course, set the stage for other works by women, including Jody Pinto's 1987 Fingerspan. And Albert Lessel's beloved Billy Goat, which was installed in 1919 in Rittenhouse Square, one of our 5 major squares, is as much a family landmark today as it was in 1919. And I think, when I think of it really, that it's the pleasure of it that it defies race and class and even age. It's just there, and it's there for everybody. And we have one of our little taglines is art for everyone, anytime. And this is really an example of that idea for us. The lighting of Philadelphia City Hall in the 20s, on the left, set a precedent for this crazy project that we did called Open Air with Raphael Lozano Hemmer that was commissioned a couple of years ago. But when you see that something like it was done, in another century, when I talk about clout, this really helps. It helps in case. Even though we want to seem like we're new and innovative, I'm telling you, if there's a precedent, use it. Because it just opens up doors and makes people think that they're part of something that's kind of the next step. Among the really great privileges that comes with working with an organization that's been around for so long is this continuity that we have, which often is, in a way, a vindication that we gain through our archival material and all of our firsthand accounts of the public art protagonists, which, you know, in various forms exists today. The artists, their patrons, their time, their spaces, their ambitions. Today, we continue that imperative through our Museum Without Walls audio program that Renee also referred to. You're making my talk quicker and easier. And this is a multi-platform program that's available in every way, online, by mobile phone, with an app, and we're continually adding to it. Right now, there's 60 different audio programs for works of art in Philadelphia. And what's unique about these is that we use this model that we sort of invented that we call the authentic voice model, because when you listen to these audios, they're not like acoustic guides. Everybody you're listening to has an authentic relationship to the sculpture. It might be a curator, it might be a historian, but it might be the grandson of the man who raised the funds, or it might be the great nephew of the artist who remembers playing in the studio and the like. In one case, great fountains, it's the guy who turns on the fountain every spring, talking about the mechanics and getting people behind the scene. So it's been immensely popular, and we plan to continue it forever. And signage and identifiers, I mean, what is this stuff and how was it done and who? They're all things that we think about. On the left is our seal from the 19th century that was affixed in bronze on all of the bronze sculptures. But today we continue that idea with, and have in recent years developed a unified signage program for the city's sculptures. We began this in 2008, and we just approach area by area as funding allows. But the signage is actually the armature for the Museum Without Walls program, because on the bottom of the sign is the number that you can call with a specific number to that audio. So it means that you don't need to have planned ahead and downloaded an app. With any phone that isn't even smart, you can call and dial the number and just press the number to hear that. The most wonderful comment that came from a third party about the program was that someone said, you know, it's like walking into a really interesting conversation about the artwork, which is really great and is a testament to our producers, because these people were never in the same room. We hire NPR producers, and they're very clever, and they make it seem like you're standing right there with these folks. Master planning. Not new. The association played a major role in developing the early plans for Philadelphia's glorious Benjamin Franklin Parkway, which was this diagonal boulevard that connected our city hall with the museum and the park itself. It was designed by a French landscape architect by the name of Jacques Rebet, who was inspired by the Champs-Élysées, and you could definitely call this a master plan. But what I thought, looking back, of course, what I think is really interesting is that the plan itself is for public art, but it was flexible enough that over time it allowed us to place many different types of artworks in that landscape. So it was, in a way, a timeless landscape that was welcoming and accommodated new work, with the recent placement, well, not so recently a Henry Moore, but more recently a really beautiful work by Marc de Souveraud, and just last year an incredible work by Roxy Payne. But I think that's the best master plan. Doesn't lock you in. It really gives you a greater ability to look towards this future that we don't know and allow new ideas and new works of art to come into the mix. So we do a lot of programming where we try, and we learned that in the summers in the early 20s, there were these large-scale municipal dances. They were called the Parkway Dances, and they were held weekly in the summers. And people would come and dance to the police and fire bands. And reportedly, according to the newspaper accounts, there were between 3,000 and 25,000 people would attend at any given dance. So we kind of reimagined this idea, and when the water was turned onto the Swan Memorial Fountain, which is centrally located along our parkway, we held an evening of tango at the Swan Fountain on the right, where all these people came, novices, and we imitated the format that they used, which was instruction. So we recruited college tango groups, who knew, to come and be the teachers. And then there would be free dancing so that professionals could dance with non-professionals. And then there would be a which attracted really amazing dancers and with cash prizes, which is exactly what they did in the 20s. And so we had, I think, between 500 and 1,000 people who showed up just for this event. The interesting thing is that at the time, they were very highly regulated for decorum. There's a bit of a theme here about decorum in Philadelphia. But they were overseen by a woman by the name of Miss Marguerite Valls, or Walls, and she actually was Philadelphia's official dance censor. Because if you got, Ms. Walsh was there. If you shook too much, Ms. Walsh was there. And she later became Philadelphia's first policewoman. So perseverance, we have a couple of stories about that, and I think all of you need encouragement to stick through some of the lumps and bumps that you encounter when you're trying to do really good work, really new work. Isamu Noguchi proposed a bolt of lightning for Philadelphia in 1933 to our organization, and we finally executed it in 1984, some 60 years later. And he confessed to me that it never could have been built at the time. The technology simply didn't exist to create an asymmetrical sculpture of that scale. It's over 100 feet. So here we have the idea of a conceptual proposal ultimately turning into a reality. And for me, this underscores something that Nori was talking about yesterday, which is the importance of giving artists the opportunity to stretch, to explore, and sometimes even sit by and allow the times to catch up with the artist. And that really was what happened in this case. And another example of this kind of delayed satisfaction is another project ahead of its time, Sala Witt's 1981 proposal to us, which was part of our Form and Function project that Renee mentioned, was finally installed some 30 years after its conception. We did this with the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And this was Sal's design for a garden, which he, as was typical of his work, he left the instructions for it to be carried out. But everybody was so worried about the maintenance and the growing and everything else that we could not get any traction on this until recently, when attitudes had changed and we were able to work with his widow, Carol, to execute this. It is the only public park design by Sala Witt that was ever executed. Okay, this is not a work of the Association for Public Art. However, I raised this story because it really was this whole idea of Rocky versus the guardians of good taste. The guardians of good taste were our art commission, because in the movie Rocky III, there was this statue of the fictional prize fighter Rocky Balboa with his arms raised up. And it's unveiled in the movie in the courtyard of the art museum. And in real life, Sylvester Stallone decided that, of course, the city and the museum would want this movie prop, and so he donated it to the city, thinking that it could remain at the top of the art museum steps in perpetuity. And this then created this ongoing debate And it was interesting because it was a debate about, the people versus the art world. People felt that this idea of Rocky's ascent was sort of symbolic of Philadelphia, which, has a reputation of being a scrappy town where, someone who really works hard and is determined and hustles like Rocky, gets to be a cultural hero. So finally, after many years, in order to acknowledge not so much the sculpture, but this cultural moment, Rocky was relocated to a little site below the museum in 2006. And not too long after, he was yarn bombed. And if you can read what it says, his vest says, "Go see the art," which is referring to the museum behind. But I bring this up because I think, we're naive to think that these issues of the us versus them and the art world versus the people are not significant issues, because they are. But I think as we learn our history and as we find ways to communicate more with people, that bridge, at least I do see it in Philadelphia, it just gets more and more and more closed. And I don't see that anymore as being this sort of radical us versus them idea, because there's so many different ways that public art can happen. And Rocky himself has been through many transformations, including ballerina. In 1973, I was working at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I did some very early, pretty major, large-scale site-specific works with artists. And this piece with Gene Davis on the left was called Franklin's Footpath, and it was at the time the largest painting in the world. It was larger than a football field, and it was in this very kind of strange interstitial place in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art that was basically a parking lot. So through this work, we converted the parking lot to actually, defining the space that people never even thought of before. And over the years, it became a parking lot again. And last year, the city has been doing programming in that space, and we suggested that how much better would it be if an artist came back again and imagined how that space might be more exuberant through the artist. And actually, we recently learned that this was awarded a year in review, so you'll hear more about it later. But part of this magic carpet, which was the project we recently did, the artist's name is Candy Coated, and she has a reputation for using all sorts of candy-colored things in her work. But among the things that she created were these artist-designed sandboxes with this crazy pink sand that were just the most popular thing on the Parkway that summer. And it's an example of, something so simple that is made all the time, but with an artist's intervention becomes this incredible thing. And interestingly, BMW was a sponsor of the Parks programs. Okay, wrap up. And they have an art car project that they've been doing for years and years. There's Calder in 1975, he did the first one. And there's Candy Coated. They invited her to decals on a BMW Mini. So I'm going to go really fast now. But Oldenburg's Clothespin was a commission of our RDA. Nearby is a work called Government of the People. I bring this up because of this whole idea of politics and patronage and how it sometimes gets in the way of public art. Before the Lipschitz work was completed, because it began as a City Percent project, it was abandoned by our then mayor, who hated it. He called it a load of plaster, but he really called it, we think, some other loads of things. But he had also run on a no new taxes platform, so he pulled the funding. And Lipschitz died, left the molds in Italy, and our organization took over the project. But here's an editorial cartoon which sort of sets up this discussion, this visual discussion of Lipschitz's piece, the clothespin, the mayor. And what really is just hysterical is that when his family, it's the greatest irony, when his family finally commissioned a memorial statue of him, they asked for and placed it in the shadow of Government of the People, which was the sculpture he despised. Just quickly, this whole idea of cultural equity and representation also is something that we, have a history of looking at. On the left are two young women visiting the All Wars Memorial to Colored Soldiers and Sailors in Philadelphia, circa 1930s. And on the right is recent work by Popon Osorio, which is called I Have a Story to Tell You, which stands for this whole idea of storytelling. We have a phrase we always use, which is that every sculpture has a story. In this case, those kids, that's their family members portrayed in glass permanently in this casita that Popon built in the community. So, he's really addressing this idea of shifting the narrative about who's commemorated and by whom. Our aforementioned All Wars Memorial to Colored Soldiers and Sailors was one of the early works in our conservation program. It was an incredible work by the German artist J. Otto Schweitzer, which you couldn't even see its beauty because of the condition of it. So thankfully, our conservation program really has done a lot to change attitudes about stewardship of public art. I think in Philadelphia and elsewhere, that work needs to be cared for, it needs to be paid attention to if it's going to be a hallmark of the public landscape. And to reiterate other things yesterday by Nori, wherever you are, there is no such thing as a maintenance-free public art. People at the time didn't know about acid rain or pollution. So finally, this is the end. I think a lot about high-tech and low-tech because we utilize and exploit like every technological thing we can think of to reach audiences, but we're also really mindful of the low-tech resources of people working together to create, support, explain, promote public art. So we now have a team of public art ambassadors. They're usually young artists or interns or students, and they're attached to every one of our projects. And they bring public art in a way to their peers and to this new generation of supporters that we are going to need in the future. So I hope that through interesting story, I think, that only the Association for Public Art has, that you can see this then and now continuum and kind of put into context the amazing work that you do that is really part of this unbelievably important, very American. Thanks so much, and thank you for the award, and thanks to my colleagues. And also, there are other members of Philadelphia's public art community here from Mural Arts Program, the city's Percent Program, to acknowledge them, because together we make this whole big Philadelphia public art scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, and congratulations again to the Association for Public Art, and congratulations for all the amazing work you've done and will be doing in the future. We're going to take a short break and then hear from the Pan Year in Review jurors next. And while you take your break, please pick up a copy of the latest issue of Public Art Review. It's just outside in the foyer. A generous gift of the Forecast Public Art and Public Art Review. So thank Jack Becker, who's around. He's the executive director for both organizations. And we'll see you in a few minutes. Cool. Hey, everybody, we're going to get started. So come on back in. I know you guys are having awesome conversations out there, but we're just going to step forward with the next session. I know you guys can't wait to hear about the Pan Year in Review. Awesome. All right, we're going to get started. So the Pan Year in Review is a national program that recognizes public art projects that represent the most compelling work from previous year. Every year, we have 2 or more public art professionals serve as jurors to review hundreds of project applications and select up to 50 projects to include. This year, we had over 300 applications and have 3 amazing jurors go through, and I'll say it, the Herculean effort to select this year's projects. This year, we had Peggy Kendellen, who has worked in the public art field for over 20 years in Portland, Oregon, and currently manages both site-specific and temporary public art projects, residencies, and the Public Art Murals program. She has conducted professional development workshops for artists and has spoken locally, regionally, and nationally on public art issues and served on public art selection panels in the Pacific Northwest in Canada. Peggy has reserved 2 terms on the Public Art Network Council and served as the council's chair in 2012. In 2009, she initiated the launch of the Northwest Public Art Council, which has become an annual convening of public art administrators from the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, Alaska, and Idaho. She has contributed essays on Public Art by the Book, edited by Barbara Goldstein, and The Practice of Public Art, edited by Cameron Cartier and Shelley Willis. We also have joining us is Lori Jo Reynolds, who's an artist and policy advocate. She was the organizer for TAMS Year 10, a grassroots campaign to close the notorious state supermax in Tams, Illinois, shuttered in 2013 by Governor Pat Quinn. As a 2010 Soros Justice Fellow, Reynolds researched best practices to stop sexual abuse and reduce recently produced work for Citizen Culture, Art and Architecture Shape Policy, Santa Monica Museum of Art, A Proximity of Consciousness, Sullivan Galleries, Chicago, and the Museum of Art Utel in Van Abbe Museum, Eindhoven, in the Netherlands, and the Lorraine Enberg Prize for Change. In 2014, she was on the staff of Governor Quinn's re-election campaign. She is now assistant professor of public arts, social justice, and University of Illinois in Chicago. We also have joining us Ernie Wong, principal in Site Design Group Limited, and also based here in Chicago, Illinois. As the founding principal and president of Site Design Group, Ernie has been instrumental in the success of the firm in the landscape architecture and urban design profession in the city of Chicago. Under his direction for over 25 years, the landscape architecture and urban design firm has won numerous national and international design awards for unprecedented creative design and beautifully detailed urban spaces. Ernie serves on the board of numerous public service organizations and professional juries, the Chinese American Service League, the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, Student Conservation Association, and the Near South Planning Board. Ernie also serves on the Mayor Rahm Emanuel's Chicago Landmarks and Cultural Affairs Commissions, and was recently named the 2010 Chicagoan of the Year by the Chicago. In 2013, Ernie was elevated to the American Society of Landscape Architects Council of Fellows for his exceptional leadership, extensive community service, and outreach work. And that's enough for me, and I'm going to turn it right over to our jurors.
Good work.
Thank you, Patricia. Before we get started, we want to sort of get a handle on who's in our audience. And so I'm curious how many artists who've done public projects are in the audience? That's a good amount. And then how many arts and public art administrators who've been on doing it for 1 to 5 years are in the audience? And how about for those who've done it for over 15 years? Wow, okay, and everyone in between is everyone else, okay. Thank you. How many real estate brokers? How many private developers? No. So in my view, from my perspective, this annual selection of projects is most important to the artists. Without it, we don't have our jobs. But I also want to thank all of the individual consultants, curators, public art managers, affiliated partners, and organizations who provide funding and help nurture from inception to an installation. As each of us tackled reviewing 300-plus applications and selecting projects to highlight for this year, we agreed that in the end we would come to a consensus of what we would present here today. So after discussion and debate, which to be honest was like herding cats amongst the three of us, we selected 30 projects to highlight this year, and we unanimously agreed on 6 of them. So, politely disagreed on others. And so based on our varied backgrounds, each of us approached the challenge slightly differently. I was looking for work where I saw growth and added value to an artist's portfolio. Projects that made the public consider issues about form and beauty, social issues, and methods of expressing ideas that were inspiring to me as both a non-practicing artist and as a public art manager. Ernie?
Thanks, Peggy. So the criteria that I used in this process really had to do with my view on public art in the urban design and landscape architecture realm, which actually started with engagement with the public and how interactive these pieces were, social interaction. I also took into mind whether these pieces were ephemeral, whether they were permanent or semi-permanent. Also took into account the context of where the piece was, how that started to affect not only the area within these pieces, but also expanding beyond that a bit. The social awareness of the piece, I think, was really important. And finally, the scale these pieces were, because this really was like comparing apples to oranges and everything in between. And so I wanted to be really careful about acknowledging those of gigantic large scale as well as those which were diminutive. So I think that was really important. Lori Jo.
Well, I just want to add that I think we did actually agree on almost everything, and that it was an artifact of the Byzantine voting process that made it seem like only 6 actually agreed. Okay. So my criteria, I feel like bringing more stuff into the world, especially on a grand scale, is a big responsibility. So I examined the inner logic and outer execution of the work and tried to understand and evaluate it based on its own reasons for being. I valued a clear sense of purpose, or a most excellent and proud uselessness, or a terrifying leap of faith. I tried to study each project for its own conceptual and aesthetic unity. And for the projects that took up historical subjects or political subjects, I wanted to understand why now, and for what, and with what outcome. And for all the projects, I examined what transformations the piece created in the community, the physical environment, the audience, the artist, or the field.
With that, okay, let's start. Which way do I? Okay. The first project that we're going to review is Insight.
Wait,
Yeah, why
let
don't
me
you
just
do that?
interject a second. I was going to just tell you how we're going to do this presentation. Each of us is going to present 10 projects and to engage in some brief exchanges about the projects, or we may simply ask questions that we couldn't answer during our discussions. Projects selected range from 1 day to 1 week to 1 month to 1 year or to however long someone is defining permanence, which is a big question, I think, for our programs these days. So we hope that this group of projects will generate discussion and debate and help make the case, as Penny said earlier, for your own programs.
Thanks, Peggy. That's actually really good because good. So this first project, Insight, by Petra Bachmeier and Sean Galero of Luftwerks. This project, I actually is very near and dear to me because of the subject matter here is the Farnsworth House in Plano, Illinois. And it's dear to me because my father, who came to this country in 1947, had a fellowship to study with Frank Lloyd Wright, and he couldn't get his visa out of China, so the next year in 47, he got his visa and was on his way up to Taliesin. And he stopped in Chicago on his way there and ran into a guy named Mies van der Rohe. And this was one of my father's first projects. I had never seen this project until after my father passed away, and I brought my 2 young sons up to this tremendous, iconic piece of architecture. But to see it in this light, no pun intended, was just astounding, because understanding how Mies's whole philosophy was exposing the structural qualities of architecture. This performance really brought that forward. And so what also astounded me about this particular project was the time they did it was in October, mid-October, when the leaves are changing. And when you look at this pavilion, and I do call it a pavilion in the landscape in a very heavily wooded area, it really starts to embrace its surrounding.
So I encourage you to go to Luftwerks' website to see more of the video. The next project is Magic Carpet that was commissioned by the Association for Public Art. So this is an exuberant explosion of color and design over 8 acres of the oval that lies in front of the Philadelphia Art Museum. Candy Coated used her signature decorative motifs rendered in vinyl, 3D illusion art, brilliantly colored sandboxes, chalk, fabric banners, with added attractions of water misters and ping pong tables. Diamond-shaped sandboxes filled with pink sand. Who wouldn't want something like that in your backyard? And colorful globes and trees. So it was like nonstop, overwhelming color and pattern. And she's passionate about color and pattern in her own work. I mean, this is just a magnificent display of her work enlarged 100 times over, and her energy as well. And it's difficult in this whole process of assessing the experience of an artwork if you're not there to see it, but I felt like the energy that you could see in these slides sort of showed how the impact was on the city at large. Ernie, you had something?
Yeah, I really thought this was such a transformative space to get this kind of dynamic color into a gritty urban area, and it's just fabulous. And I thought that the engagement with the public was phenomenal.
So this is Residents of New York by Andre Serrano with More Art. So Andre Serrano engaged with homeless individuals in New York City to create this piece. It's a site-specific public art project with large-scale photographic portraits. The project transformed distinct locations around Washington Square, including Judson Memorial Church, and public phone booths around Manhattan, and a full occupation of the West Forest subway station, and more. And this is the first of a few projects that use public art to address a large-scale societal problem, and that really challenged me to think about how they were working. Many of these portraits are very hard, unwavering images of people very bundled up in clothes, sitting on the sidewalk. The people seem uncomfortable or even miserable, some of them. And the compositions refuse any comfort or escape. And it was hard for me not to think about and miss Nomads, Serrano's earlier work, where he brought individuals who were homeless into the studio and took these imaginative, collaborative portraits of what appeared to be very self-possessed subjects. But I had to grapple with the fact that this piece doesn't work that way. And in fact, in a Brechtian sense, depicting the individualism of homeless people would be missing the point. Brecht didn't want audiences to get so emotionally invested in the characters that they would miss the broader social circumstance. Brecht wanted art to historicize and tell an accurate story about power relationships in the present. So the issue isn't that the people who are homeless are people, it's that they're homeless. And that's how I see this project, pointing to the systemic, structural existence of homeless people. And after all, very little has changed about homeless people in the 25 years since Serrano made Nomads, except that there are a lot more of them. So this work is placed, is there a video on this? No. Okay, sorry. This work is placed so that we pedestrians see and take a look at the people that we don't normally study, and to see them in the same public spaces where we could already see them if we looked. The project simultaneously invites us to see homeless people and reminds us that we don't look at homeless people. Brecht would say that art that individualizes homeless people reminds us of our universal humanity and makes us feel good, but art that shows homeless people as if they're part of the landscape reveals a system that produces them. For Brecht, that was the political promise of historicizing theater. And he said, although it concentrates on the everyday, it asks, was it always like that? Is this the way of the world, something that can't be affected? Did they do so in every age? And that's what this project does for me. And Serrano doesn't use the term homeless people, but calls the subjects of his portraits residents of New York. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one more.
And I think what's interesting is their placement, at least in the tunnel, is in areas where you typically find advertisement. So how does that change a commuter's perspective of looking, thinking of what they're looking at when they see these pictures of the residents of New York?
She continues.
Okay, and so this one is New York Minute, a large-scale temporary video installation in the recently opened Fulton Center, made by new media artist Gabriel Barcia Colombo and commissioned by MTA Arts and Design. So in case you haven't heard, a New York Minute is a term that refers to the frenzied and hectic pace of a New Yorker's life. Because a New Yorker does in an instant what it would take someone in Georgia to do a whole minute. Okay. To do. Okay. Thank you for laughing at that. I appreciate that. So each of the 52 channels in this this huge installation features New Yorkers doing everyday activities in extremely slow motion. The artist describes the interactions on video as comical and sometimes poignant, but they're also absolutely intriguing and mesmerizing. New York Minute is a huge, colorful, high-tech invitation to study human expression and animation. The videos feel as pioneering as Muybridge Motion Studies or Yvonne Rainer and the Judson Dance Theater, who used untrained dancers and ordinary movements, such as performers who simply walked across the stage. Because if we give enough attention to it, our locomotion is as interesting and important as any performance. I'm going up to the video here. So I don't know how often New Yorkers throw money, but everything else looked fairly familiar. And I worship this artist for having a dog in there. So it just seems like it makes a thrilling, gorgeous spectacle for pedestrians, but it's in a public space with so much competition for attention that you can only figure there was a formula that the screen had to be 10,000 times as large as an iPhone, to pull attention from our personal devices. In fact, the 52 screens range from 55-inch LCD screens to LED walls measuring 31 feet by 19 feet. But once you look up, it's far more magical and revelatory than text messages, because it seems like we've forgotten to be fascinated by our own ordinary selves.
That's wonderful. So the next project is Sky Reflector Net, also in the Fulton Center. And this piece really is part of the building. It really is a major part of the building, which, so this is done by James Carpenter Design Associates, Grimshaw Architects, and Arup. The commissioning agency was the Metropolitan Transportation Authority Arts and Design. And what's fascinating about this piece is you really talk about light and shadow and how that starts to change the space within it. So as Lori Jo was talking about the New York Minute and how that kind of transforms that space, this by itself transforms itself through the way the sunlight hits this oculus and starts to cast these different shadows on the space within it. It's always reminded me a little bit. About 10 years ago, I was in Kyoto and saw one of Tadao Ando's museums. And if you stood in that same place throughout the entire day, the space itself would change because of the way the light hit each wall. And so I was really fascinated by this piece and how it started to capture the essence of our universe within this very, very busy subway node. And so I think that's all I have on
That
this.
place is a pot of gold.
It is.
Fulton Center.
It really is.
Portland has one of Jamie Carpenter's pieces from 1985 that shows the seeds of him developing this idea, and it's interesting to see where he's taking it 20, 30 years later.
Absolutely incredible. This took, what did they say?
That wasn't,
They didn't indicate how long it took. Well, the building, I'm sure, took. 11 years. Amazing. The next piece is Air Garden by Benjamin Ball and Gaston Nogues. The commissioning agency on this was the City of Los Angeles, Department of Cultural Affairs. This is a amazing piece set in the atrium, one of the atriums of the Los Angeles airport. And I kept on looking at this, at how this kind of really transparent piece started to change the shape within this particular space. It was interesting during our discussions, actually, Peggy, I think you had mentioned that that some of the other pieces that have been very similar to this don't work as well because the space is too confined, and I think this is actually really the right location for this. Weighing nearly 6,000 pounds, the sculpture is comprised of 7,092 stainless steel chains hanging in the catenary curved formations. The transparency of this piece really is really engaging because of the colors within this very white space. It really starts to cast that a lot of color around it, and seeing through it, I think is really, this curtain is really beautiful. What was interesting, as I started to look at some of their other work, though, this piece actually is probably, I was very engaged with some of the other works that they did. For instance, the pavilion at Coachella, but it is really. Their work just ranges so far in terms of dealing with site-specific projects, changing the typology of the process, and as well as materials as they go through that.
and airports offer such large, light-filled spaces for artists to work in, so that's why I thought this was a really good match for this particular idea. And really using the light that comes through the space and the various points of view that people can have of it to a good effect, final effect.
The next piece is The Rippling Wall. So I am going to clarify that Peggy actually had no say in this whatsoever, so this is all Lori Jo and I talking about this. This is by David Franklin in the commissioning agency, was the City of Portland, Portland Fire and Rescue. What was really fascinating to me about this is, I deal with a lot of public spaces, but also public buildings throughout the city of Chicago. And never before have I seen the entire facade of a public building utilized in such a manner. And I thought that was really interesting and setting a precedent, I think, of engaging municipalities in using art as a part of their building. I thought was really fascinating. And this, very kind of small space, but really engaging as it changes the ripples of this piece, really starts to change and shimmer. And you're going to see a lot of these actually as we move forward. Somehow I got stuck with all the buildings facades to talk about. So if I get, if you hear the same thing coming out of my mouth, but this is such a wonderful piece, and based on this mock-up of the rippling, the ripples that each water drop kind of puts together as it falls.
Another public building that incorporated public art was a household hazardous facility, and the city of San Jose commissioned artist Peter Richards to create Watershed. And the artwork emphasizes the human needs of food through the incorporation of mature olive trees, 100-year-old olive trees that had to be removed from their original site and replanted here, and then the human need of water. And he created this water feature based on a historic flip-flop flume. So in this context, next to a household hazardous waste facility, these elements suggest the fundamental aspects of human existence, weighed against the continuing stream of materials that moves through our lives at various levels of expense and consequence and waste. The tank stores rainwater from the roof and irrigates 100-year-old olive trees, like I mentioned earlier. And the watershed is constructed of materials salvaged from the demolition of on-site buildings. Oops. This tableau of a romantic grove and agricultural watershed with a viewing window into the household hazardous waste facility, or provides a view into it. So there have been other projects at wastewater treatment plants that have been recognized by the Year in Review, most recently the Brightwater project in Washington. And I think it's important that artists continue to be invited to the table for these projects, as have Peter Richards, Buster Simpson, Michael Singer, Patricia Johansson, and others. The next project is a mathematical theory of communication, which was commissioned by Landmarks, the public art program at the University of Austin, or University of Texas at Austin. And this is, as much as I was crazy over Candy Coated's project and her exuberant pattern and color, I'm equally fascinated by how the artist Casey Reese used the craft and technique of computer programming and code to create this project. It's these mural-sized inkjet prints cover 2 walls near the main atrium of the Gates Dell complex, home to the Department of Computer Science. Reese is the co-creator of the open source programming language and software processing used widely in media art and visual design, and he teaches at UCLA. He captured television signals with an antenna and converted that information to a visual representation of colored line patterns installed on 2 opposing walls. The more I learned about the project, the more intrigued I became with it. I was fascinated by his sources and how he attempted to bring order to the chaos. And he also was, when the department was seeking artists for this project, they wanted to create a piece that would complement an existing Sol LeWitt piece on the exterior of the building that was a sculpture installation of concrete cubes that was installed in 2011. So this juxtaposition of LeWitt's work, where he gives instructions and people construct the work, with Casey Reese using the computer to create to design and construct the work was another interesting component to this piece.
Oh, I just wanted to say about mathematical theory, besides just the incredibly obscure, strange formula used to make the murals, I love the way they're across from each other, and so it kind of implies that the person at the desk, they look like aerial photos across from each other, so it kind of implies that the person at the desk is floating kind of in orbit between these two spaces.
So next up is Bayview Rise by the team of Laura Haddad and Tom Drugan, commissioned by the San Francisco Arts Commission. So it's an illuminated mural on an 187-foot abandoned grain elevator that marks the northern entry to San Francisco's Bayview district. The Bayview has been home to San Francisco's shipyards, slaughterhouses, manufacturing, sewage treatment, and the power plant. But it's also been characterized by social and environmental injustice, unemployment, and urban decline. The title Bayview Rise is almost a mandate inspired by the words of a 96-year-old activist who described the Bayview area as a balloon waiting for someone to put some more air in it and blow it up. And so that metaphor became the touchstone for the mural's design, and one that weaves together imagery rooted in Bayview's history and future aspirations. At night, colored lights cause parts of the mural the same color to be highlighted, while other colors recede into the dark background. Haddad and Drugan consistently research the history, culture, and future of sites when developing their ideas, and they've been recognized in the past and year in review for their ambitious works that are really distinctive for each site.
This is really, when I started looking at this and understanding the industrial areas that every city has, and the treatments and the opportunities for these kinds of treatments were just astounding to me, and the difference that can make, and how that can really start to enhance industry that has really gone on the decline and has changed, but left these remnants of buildings throughout certain areas of every city throughout the U.S. So that was really fascinating.
Another mural, temporary, is at the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy, a mural by Shanique Smith, a New York-based artist. And she also had a show at the Museum of Fine Arts at the time, so this was an extension. It was a good partnership between the two organizations to feature a pretty bold expression on this site. It's a variation. I wanted to show what the building actually looks like without any artwork on it, because I've only seen it with pictures of it with artwork, so I need to see what the underlying structure looks like. It's a variation of her 2013 painting, Seven Moons, and she wanted to use that painting because she felt that the circular patterns and her palette really fit with the geometry of the building. And her work, this particular work, draws an inspiration from various sources such as alchemy, astrology, music, and the mythology and art of indigenous cultures. And by enlarging it to the scale of 70 feet, this microcosm of materials is seen and experienced from a whole new perspective. So there were performances, music, art, and dance on the green that she viewed as an expansion of her mural. And she hoped were inspired by the spirals and color in the design.
And I support all art with large coffee lids. Got my vote. Okay, so now this is Reconciliation. The Canadian Indian Residential Schools Truth and Reconciliation Commission, formed in 2008, held its closing event 2 weeks ago. The first page of their final report summary describes the role residential schools played by design in the cultural genocide of Canada's Aboriginal people. I almost read that first page to you, but it would take a long time and be very depressing. But you should read it. It's a stunning account of catastrophic wrongdoing. So this particular project is in dialogue with this national effort and part of the 2013 Year of Reconciliation in Vancouver to stimulate awareness of the historical impacts of residential schools and to encourage reconciliation and healing. The last schools were closed in 1990. This is recent history. As part of the Truth and Reconciliation, there have been thousands of conversations, projects, hearings, outpourings of testimony from survivors and family members. It makes sense to create cultural spaces for different perspectives in as many places as possible. This particular project is a group of projects. It represents 10 temporary works chosen by a panel of Aboriginal artists and educators to go in transit shelters, transit stations, library banners, and on video advertising screens. And this works very well because it's unmonumental. Each piece is fairly small scale, put in city niches that seem to make them conversational and approachable. And I hope they work on the ground, I can only imagine they do, in dialogue with each other and in a dialogue that grows over time. Given the amount of testimony in the overall national project and the searing revelations, such as the fact that thousands of children who died at the schools were buried in unmarked graves, I particularly liked that most of the work in this series didn't use language. For example, Giants Among Us by Bracken Hanus Corlett, which is actually this one, addresses the challenges of reconciliation using monsters and giants from Northwest Coast stories. And Brian Liu's banners depicted a series of hands making welcoming gestures to serve as an invitation to witness this national process of understanding, healing, and reconciliation. One of the videos does have language. In fact, the video with language has only language. And we're going to watch it while I talk. The artist handwrites in cursive the beginning of the official apology.
And the funny thing is that they don't teach cursive in schools anymore.
There's a much longer conversation to be had about cursive. So this letter, it reminds you of, back when we did learn cursive, of children being forced to sit at desks and take pen to paper to apologize, being forced to write an apology. The artist Jeremy Borsos points out that although the harm itself is unquantifiable, the phrase tries to quantify the number of First Nations people affected, which is part of the problem with language. Borsos also mentions that by carefully observing each word being formed, the viewer is turned into the writer. Do y'all want to add anything on the next one? Okay.
What's the next one?
No, I'm next. Oh, sorry. Give me that back. There's some more. So the next one is Empty Chair, The Empty Chair. So the narrative, this is The Empty Chair, commissioned by the City and Borough of Juneau, Alaska, and the Empty Chair Committee with the artist Peter Requiem. The narrative text on this monument reads, after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, people of Japanese ancestry living on America's West Coast were forcibly removed and incarcerated in isolated government internment camps. In May 1942, this is still the text on the monument, the seniors at Juneau High School left an empty chair during their graduation ceremony to underscore the absence of their Japanese American valedictorian, John Tanaka. By extension, this empty chair honors all of the Japanese uprooted from their homes and communities. The Empty Chair Memorial represents the void the people of Juneau felt for their friends and neighbors impacted by this injustice. The names of those interned are echoed on the bronze floor. So, as we know, in the panic after Pearl Harbor, FDR signed an executive order to send 120,000 persons of Japanese descent to 10 relocation camps without due process. 200 came from Alaska and 53 from Juneau. John Tanaka and his family were imprisoned at the Minidoka internment camp in Idaho. And in reading about this, I was surprised to learn, I learned a lot more than I have time to tell you about, but I was surprised to learn that once his class realized that the Tanakas were being evacuated, they held a special graduation ceremony for him alone. Juneau High School's 1942 valedictorian. And that they had a special graduation for just him is actually even more amazing and itself worthy of a single chair monument. But the monument is for, the time after that when the rest of his class graduated, leaving this empty wooden folding chair to represent him. What's so great about this monument is that it acknowledges the harm to John Tanaka and his family and other families, but it also celebrates a community response taken by the people who knew him that was instinctive, immediate, it was timely, and it showed that fear-mongering can be resisted. People trusted that they knew their friends and neighbors better than the US government did. How many monuments are there to communities doing the right thing? It's a monument that we really needed to see in the decade after 9/11. It's a humble and simple monument, a bronze folding chair on bronze floorboards, and it's supposed to be a little larger than scale. That's John Tanaka's family, and the team that worked on it include his surviving family members and friends. And it's in a good place, the Capitol School Park, which is adjacent to the state Capitol building. And it's on the site once occupied by the elementary school where most of the Japanese Americans and Japanese who were interned began their formal education.
What was interesting, as I was kind of going through this entire thing 2 nights ago, was the First Lady, Michelle Obama, gave the graduation speech at King High School here in Chicago. And there was an empty chair for Hadia Pendleton, who would have graduated this year.
Who's next?
I think I'm next, right?
Ernie's next.
No,
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
We're losing it up here.
Okay, the Vaulted Willow. This is an incredible thing from outer space that landed in a park. Commissioned by the Edmonton Arts Council and the artists Mark Furness and the many others. Or the very many, I'm sorry. This is located in a park of ultra-lightweight architectural folly where form, structure, and ornamentation come together in a single unified system. I was very intrigued by this, not only because, well, again, its location, landing in this wonderful wooded park, but also that the scale of it is just enormous. And, the question keeps on coming, how long does it take to build something like that? And the part about it that really intrigued me was especially this photograph of when you stand away from it, the scale is enormous, but you get within it and it becomes very intimate. And it's very playful. The tactile and exposed construction of this really starts to enamor both kids and adults together. And it's this sense of curiosity, I think, that really starts to draw us all to this digital design and fabrication and casting these beautiful shadows. As you can probably tell, I'm very much into how sunlight hits the ground and what filters through it. But it's a really fascinating piece. There were 2 entries for this, and we were really intrigued. We kept on going back and forth of what were the real colors on this, and the other submission actually had some different colors to it. So but we really thought this was a fabulous piece. Actually, some of the other work that Mark Furness has done, the Frax Center in Orleans, France, as well as the Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York City, has just been completely fabulous and really engaging as well.
Okay, and this is Westmoreland Nature Play. This nature playground is just completely irresistible, and anyone who is or ever was a kid can clearly see this. It's a nature play pilot project, which they describe as a new/old approach to playgrounds. And when I grew up, our playground was half buried tires in these gravel yards. But we also did have trees and creeks. But I remember much later when our friends bought a daycare center after they, well, I won't get into that. And the state regulations prohibited the kids from playing near their beautiful old oak tree because they could trip on the roots. So I guess everybody knows this, but we've come along. We went down the wrong road with playgrounds for a long time. But now look, this nature play is the work of artist Adam Kuby with landscape architects Greenworks and Portland Parks and Recreation. They use themes based on the creek which runs through the park, starting in a giant sequoia grove and guiding children through a series of play mounds with increasing difficulty, ranging from grassy mounds, a creek mound, a forest mound, to a mountain mound. And I was wondering, what's the difference between a play mound and a real mound? I mean, a mound is a mound. The playground is located on the west side of Westmoreland Park in Portland, which was the recent site of a major restoration project to bring salmon back to Crystal Springs Creek. This piece has the appeal and ethos of land art. People in these pictures, and I would if I was there, seem to follow sculpture after sculpture made out of boulders, sticks, branches, in a path of sand, and there's water. And besides being so intuitive and compelling, it increases our sensibility towards the natural world and the environment. It doesn't just offer the experience of play, it's a visceral experience of form and materials. It seems like it teaches kids to like art. And I can see adults, kids, grandparents alike being attracted to this because it's so intuitive and compelling, and it has tunnels, entry points, exit points, peaks, and valleys. And unlike playgrounds where kids can swing alone and slide alone and never really interact with each other, these log climbers have rope and giant boulders that serve as a series of meeting places that draw kids into interaction and cooperation and open-ended play. And I'm excited to hear what Ernie has to say about this.
And it's really amazing, we do a lot of playgrounds. You played the video,
Okay.
that's fine.
I'm sorry.
And it's really, there's this new trend, this reviving nature play into kids' lives after 50 years of doing playground structures, of which the playground manufacturers have trained us into saying you have to separate the 5 to 12 years old and the 12 to whatever, and this starts to really speak to the kids to really engage with each other, as we've done the very few, not of this scale, here in Chicago. We've started to watch older kids helping younger kids build things, and we've grown up with this huge burden in doing playgrounds of liability. You can't do this because a kid might hurt himself. Well, the kid's not going to put one of these big logs into somebody else, any other kid's eye. So you won't be happy until you put out somebody's eye. This is really, I think, teaching our kids and our youth that this world really has something more to offer. The next piece is Boys Cry Too by Orly. I think, yes?
Oh.
Yes, it was mine.
Oh, yeah, it's
Sorry. Give me that, please. Oh, here.
wait, now it's
Here you
mine.
go. Now you got the, look at all those kids. They're amazing.
We love this. We can watch it all day.
Yeah. Look, nobody's eyes are being put out. Come on.
It takes two to climb a boulder.
Oh, yeah. Orly, how do you pronounce it? Jenge? Somebody? Jenge. And this is commissioned by the Herman Park Conservancy. The first time, actually, that I had seen this work was driving down Lakeshore Drive and saw this big, giant, knotted, roped, bright red piece along at the curve of Lakeshore Drive and between this highway, well, essentially a highway and the lake. And I thought to myself, this is just incredible, the scale of it, this texture of rope. And then I thought to myself, ew, kids are touching this, and there's all kinds of nasty stuff on there. And then all of a sudden, my little, phobia comes out. But this was really, really fascinating. These knitted pieces. What I was talking about earlier was a hot rod, red rope along the lakefront. But these knitted and knotted treatments at this scale are just incredible. And we talked about this quite a bit, actually, about how does this really start to engage with the landscape? And I think one of the comments that came out was, the grass starts growing through it. And we thought that was really amazing to have this brightly colored, just wonderful piece interwoven itself, not only amongst itself, within itself, but also into the landscape. And it starts to become a part of the landscape. The scale is what really draws us to this. And kids are drawn to these colors, and adults are just fascinated with what is this on the ground. And as they kind of walk along it and through it. Over the years, the landscape does start to grow through it. And what we found really interesting, I made the comment that in my business, we call this mulch.
I was kind of fascinated by the idea that little kids would romp all over this and then go home and see their oven mitts and pot holders differently.
I think this particular project, which is a revamp of a similar project she'd done elsewhere, was only up for 1 month. So that sort of really getting integrated into the lawn probably didn't happen. And probably people were afraid of how they were going to mow the grass around something like that without damaging it. The next project is Backyard Pool by Tamara Johnson, and this was commissioned by the Rock Rose Development Corporation. It's another, Tamara had done a previous temporary installation at Socrates Sculpture Park in Long Island City, and this was on an empty lot in another part of the city. And the developer invited her to do her project here. And so she put in a life-sized, non-functioning swimming pool, complete with a diving board and the no diving sign, which everyone adhered to. And I think the juxtaposition of this piece against these modern high-rises that are going up can be fairly sobering, but at the same time slightly comical. She used a combination of cast concrete, ceramic tile, aluminum, fiberglass, grass seed, and latex paint. As a universal visualization of fading memories and forgotten landscapes, Backyard Pool belongs to no particular backyard. Instead, its undulating materiality in connection with viewers creates a new experience of place. And it resembles lots of hundreds of backyard pools that are found, or thousands around the country. It sparked a comment online asking for a real pool at this site. So we all remember the inflatable backyard pools from our childhood, or the ones that collapsed under the weight of water. But now, with droughts and water shortages proliferating across the country, perhaps this is the future of thousands of backyard pools, and they'll become a different kind of community gathering place.
I'm concerned about the diving board. Okay, the Eagle has landed. This was partially sponsored by the Arts Council of Fort Worth and Downtown Fort Worth Incorporated, along with public and private donors and members of the collective and community members. Okay, so for some 25 years, Alexander Calder's iconic 39-foot tall orange steel sculpture that looks somewhat like that stood downtown in front of the Fort Worth National Bank. When the bank was sold, the sculpture was auctioned off and removed. Now, 15 years later, the Eagle has landed. This was created by the 12-member art collective called Homecoming Committee, with an exclamation point, as both an object and an event. This inflatable pop-up was modeled after Calder's The Eagle and taken to 8 locations to activate conversations about the public and private ownership of art in public places. Because Fort Worth Public Art currently does not have a method of commissioning temporary projects, the goal was not only to engage the public in dialogue over the value of art in public policies, but to demonstrate with this project the power of temporary projects. What better catalyst for talking about public art than this large, floppy, puffy, humble, awkward, bumbling, helpless, shoulder-shrugging, lovable, huggable mascot for temporary art? Who could wish it harm? So we found this just a brilliant way to revisit the intrigue and insult of the past, soothe over those who were burned by it, and to inspire discussion over the function of public art and who should own it. And it sounds like it ended up rekindling the flame for thinking about a new iconic sculpture for Fort Worth as well. It also sounds like the project did a great job inviting people to look at the complexities of arts funding and the advantages of private versus public funds. So for example, one of the creators, Devin Nolan, was quoted in Public Art Review this year saying, "I began the project thinking that the fact that the Calder was privately owned was the problem. But I came to the realization that there's a limit to what a city-funded program can provide us. They have a certain responsibility to the public that doesn't always translate to taking risks. In 1974, that risk was the Calder." So it's clearly been an interesting transformative process. And this is truly plop art. Oh, I think, sorry. There may be one more.
And the Calder piece is now at the Seattle Art Museum's outdoor sculpture garden. And there it is, deflated. Or being fabricated, actually. The next project is the Traveling Museum, and it was received funding from Forecast Public Art. It was designed and curated by the two-person Rural Aesthetic Initiative. It's Andrew Norden and Lisa Berg. And it functioned as a mobile project space for art exhibits and events to 8 different communities, I think, in rural Minnesota. The architecture itself is based on ice houses, or Minnesota ice shanties, and grain storage bins and other farm architecture. So they conducted a number of different art events in this project, and I was drawn to it. It's not, these sorts of things, they have happened before, but what I was drawn to was this was going out into smaller communities where the people aren't able to go to St. Paul, Minneapolis to see some artwork at a museum. So the artists brought the artwork, brought their community's artwork to them. And so they found artists in the various communities, and they had one exhibit of drawings of birds that have died as a result of collisions. They had an exhibit where the 2 artists started the conversation with a tagline, and then the communities came in and did some drawings. They parked it next to a recording studio where musicians recorded 3 songs and looped them into the trailer to become part of another artist's installation. And it continues to live on. It participated in Art in Odd Places in Indianapolis last year, and actually was an ice fishing house this past winter. And, you know, a number of the applications that we reviewed were telling us how many screws, how many cables, how many gallons of paint, how many yards of fabric were used in a particular project. And on this project's website, they said that they listed 5,997 miles driven, 11 events, 17 Minnesota artists, 8 communities, 50 cups of gas station coffee, and 25 fish. So it's a different kind of material use. The next project is Congregation, which was created by UK-based artists Kit Monkman and Tim Wexler, and made possible through the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership, installed in Market Square for 1 month last winter. And the Market Square Public Art Program is an initiative by the City of Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership. These two artists have collaborated for 15 years on a shared interest of new technology and its convergence with art. The artists like to call their work digital playgrounds where everybody takes ownership of the work and could create an event or a series of events. So we'll watch this video. You can see how powerful the experience was for a number of people. So a local community member volunteered his time to create this video, which I thought was great, and didn't charge at all for his time. The artists started working together doing light and sound for bands, and they found that that environment was really restrictive. And so eventually they moved into dance companies. And then more recently, they're doing these projects which are interactive with the general public. and where everybody takes ownership of the work without any need for language at all, except for language of movement. And I think when it works well, artists can create the catalyst, can be the catalyst, or artwork can be the catalyst for deep engagement of participants, connecting with other people. And this was the North American debut for this piece. So congratulations to Pittsburgh for taking that risk.
Absolutely wonderful. And it just starts to speak to how light and digitology, is that a word?
It is now.
Is starting to really become such a medium for many artists, and how we start to embrace the things that are at our hands, and the things that we continue to discover. So Janet Eckelman's name has come up numerous times. This work that she did, Skies Painted with an Unnumbered Sparks, was commissioned by the city of Vancouver in collaboration with Aaron Koblin, who at that time was working at Google as a creative director of data arts. Now I understand that Aaron Koblin is now with Verse, VRSE, and doing their digital arts as well. It's incredible that these pieces can become so engaging and transparent at the same time. I mean, they really, this piece, we kept on describing as it could go anywhere, and it has actually. Her work has been featured in Singapore, as numerous places all over the world, and it continues to astound us, and continues to engage with millions and millions of people. The infusion of art and technology is really starting to evolve more and more. I kept on asking myself, gee, well, at what point are the Wenlendas going to tightrope over one of these pieces? But that'll probably be during the day. But it really starts to engage not only with people watching it, but it also starts to focus on the areas that it's within and attached to. Do you have any?
This was commissioned as part of the TED Conference's 30th anniversary, which was held in Vancouver last year. And I'll be real curious to see where Janet goes with this. This is the first time she's done interactive work, but I'm also curious where her portfolio of these enormous forms that are suspended in air, where's that going to take her down the road? I know she's working on a very different piece for Philadelphia, and I'll be really curious to see what she takes from the depth of her work in this aesthetic to what she's doing in Philadelphia. And the video, I was disappointed that there wasn't a video as part of this application, because when I went online and looked at the video, it would have really communicated more of what the experience was like at that space when you were interacting with it, because people could use their phones to create color and movement, and it's not really conveyed in these images. Next. Okay. So this is another exuberant use of color in these projects. And this is a project, this is not the project, this is the before picture.
That's kind of stark.
You know, yellow is,
Is that the yellow
color.
line? Yeah. So this is the Wayne Tunnel, and the project came out of a Regional Trail Systems Arts Master Plan. And the project was commissioned by 4Culture in King County in Seattle. And the plan outlined a vision for creating art and design enhancements that can improve the trail experience and create a sense of arrival at different train portals. So this was the result of the artist taking a look at that space and what could she do to make riding your bike through this or walking through it be sort of an immersive experience and sort of forgetting where you were, driving through this large kaleidoscope. And it's part of the artist's growing portfolio of community-inspired works. And she had people helping her paint the entire project. And she usually uses words. She uses a lot of text in her mural projects. But here, instead, she used symbols of flora and fauna that are found in the area. Oops.
Love this. Forget about Willy Wonka. We're going to go here. Cyclastro is a project by Katarina Gross and commissioned by the City of Philadelphia Mural Arts Program. I had earlier commented on our industrial areas, and this continues to be another one that really starts to make another use of industrial buildings that are kind of left over. If we did this throughout the entire city of Detroit, I'm sure Detroit would be a different place right now. But this was is a temporary site-specific installation along 7 passages of the Northeast Rail Corridor in Philadelphia. Was conceived as a choreographed experience for train riders, reimagining the experience of art and the urban environment for travelers who pass through the cityscape, transformed by this intervention into a large-scale urban earthwork and landscape painting in real time and space. And so the experience of this, both traveling by train as well as standing outside of it, really starts to infuse such color into which would be typically a very bleak and desolate landscape. These 7 passages stretched a 5-mile corridor between Philadelphia's 30th Street station and the North Philadelphia station. So the next time I'm in Philadelphia, I think I'm going to have to really take a lot of train rides.
I think the only way her studio work, if any of you are familiar with it, the only way her studio work could have come outdoors is in this sort of explosive installation. And I'm still considering it. I'm still thinking about it after first seeing it and thinking about its impact over time on the buildings and on the landscape.
I talked about the installations on buildings and the impact of this. And at first, when I took a look at this project, Quill, by Christian Moeller, it's very, very subtle. You don't really, it's a nice treatment of a building. I didn't really think too much about it until I saw those night photographs and how these tiny little mirrors mounted on this aluminum panels really started to change. And I started to look more into Moeller's work and was really fascinated by the methodology and how he starts to look at things. And again, very site-specific. The robotics and the kinetic features of these projects were really fascinating, and how they started to really change, again, those spaces around, surrounding it. I was particularly drawn to actually another piece that he did, Mojo, in San Pedro, California, which, very similar to the congregation piece, kind of followed people around with the spotlight. But this really was just a very kind of elegant, subtle piece that I thought merited some recognition. No, you can.
Okay. So this is a very complicated and sensitive project. This is the State Hospital Memorial to Unclaimed Cremains, created by Lead Pencil Studio and commissioned by Oregon State Hospital and Oregon Arts Commission. So this memorial was designed to hold the 3,426 ash remains of patients who died at the Oregon State Hospital, which was formerly the Oregon State Insane Asylum. And that is the site where One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the film was filmed, actually, not set. And so these remains were never claimed. And it's a fascinating story because it was actually a legislator walking through on a tour who even discovered the cremains. And I was impressed by that as a big fan of legislative oversight. This was a very inspiring story. So the original copper urns of these patients were corroded from poor storage and had come to represent the legacy of forgetting people in mental asylums. And the project ends up protecting both the copper canisters and also the remains. And the hospital's working to return them to any remaining family members. So what they did so that the public could continue to see these canisters from the outside, the artist cut a large window into one wall of the crematorium, of the historic crematorium, and lowered that brick wall, you can see it here, to become part of the floor inside the building, communicating the opening of this long hidden history. And this move was apparently very controversial and took a long time getting permission to do this to this historic building. And outside the window is a wooden bench made from a sycamore tree that was on the grounds of the hospital. And you can see the plaza there, where the bench is located, which I'll talk about in a second. But they moved the cremains from those copper canisters to new ceramic urns, which the artist fabricated in a residency at the Kohler Company. And so they're placed in this new columbarium wall, which is built on the ghost footprint of a demolished morgue. This is the whole ghost footprint that sat adjacent to the crematorium. Okay, so and that's them making these, yeah. So if and when family members come to claim the remains, then they replace the urns with copper tubes, so you see that there. And nearly 200 have been claimed. So this project was, a tremendous undertaking and required a lot of logistical coordination between the hospital and the state legislature and the historic commission and the artists. They had to reconcile thousands of records and even change state law in order to make those records public and so forth. But they've made it into a functioning kind of family unification project, and made it, kind of a quiet testimony to truth and reconciliation and a monument on the hospital grounds. The artist wrote, "This project is equal parts landscape gesture, sculptural response, historic rehabilitation, social comment, and an effort toward healing and closure." I can't imagine how the artists felt spending years of their lives intersected with the legacy of institutionalization and, holding the remains of thousands of people abandoned in this system. And I feel, what draws me to projects like this so much is that they often force us to ask the question of who is being marginalized, institutionalized, and forgotten right now as we speak. And it's a very easy question to answer. It's the same exact people. We no longer have this kind of mental institution except in prisons, which is where many people go when they don't have treatment and support in the community. And since we're here in Chicago, I just want to point out that the Chicago County Jail, just 7 miles southwest of here, is the largest single-site jail in the United States. And as Sheriff Dart himself constantly reiterates to anyone who will listen, it's the largest mental health facility in the nation. Okay.
So after looking at lots of these large-scale pieces, this all happened more or less by Crystal Schenk and Shelby Davis, collaborating with the landscape architects of Nauvoo and Engan, and KPFF engineers. We thought this was I thought it was just wonderful to have to actually look for these very whimsical pieces throughout the city of Portland. This is done by the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation. I love to see transportation engaging with these with artists. So this was really this thing of discovery, kind of Gulliver's Travels. I hope I didn't just turn it off, did I? No. Gulliver's Travels mixed in with an Easter egg hunt. So having to really start to discover and find these little pieces all over Division Street in Portland was really quite engaging in looking at this, especially in comparison to all the large pieces that we've been seeing. So, who is create?
I have to admit that at first I was a little repelled by being reminded of all the ugly little statuette things that I grew up with in Georgia. But I really, this really did win me over. Okay. Why? Because there's a dog showing the scale of it. Okay. And think about the scale of that compared to Create, the community meal, led by C2 Jones, artist, commissioned by Public Arts St. Paul. So there's a legacy of social practice art about food, from Judy Chicago's dinner party to Conflict Kitchen. And I think this really deserves a place in that legacy, because they got 2,000 people out of their houses for a meal at a table that was half a mile long. There were 500 volunteers, there's C2 Jones, including greeters, food captains, food runners, cleanup crew, and 250 table hosts. Altogether, they led rituals of entry, greeting, food service, and departure. It was a process-based work and involved collaboration with the people who make food locally. But clearly, the event itself was a spectacle, and it was performed with glorious ritual and even rehearsed. They had a seating chart for 2,000 people. Come on. And the placemats were all handmade. And all the volunteers got to keep a serving spoon. There were lovely details throughout the project like that. The goal of this project was to lower barriers for making healthy food choices and create a vision for a just and accessible food system. The themes were food access, food justice, and healthy eating. So this socially engaged public artwork, of course, was led by Frogtown resident C2 Jones, in collaboration with a cohort of artists that included papermaker Mary Hark, Anyana Dance Theater, visual artists Cliff Garton, Emily Stover, and Asa Hoyt, poets G.E. Patterson and Soyini Guten, and spoken word artists led by To Siku Lee and Deek Abdi. I thought they all deserved a mention. And C2 noted that all 2,000 diners were also artistic collaborators, as they engaged in an artistic ritual of meal, spoke words of grace and closing, and shared food stories of the world cultures that comprise their community. People not only talked about food, shared a meal, but they were encouraged to make a food pledge for their own health and for the health of their beloved community. This is an amazing scale, not just for public art, but for civic engagement at all. And it was amazing for me to think about the logistics. They had to figure out, for example, how people could get from one side of the table to the other without walking a mile. Think about that.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to see how this project affected thousands of people involved in it, and I'm sure they told thousands of people. And it also makes you realize that the scale is really just the size of a community all having a discussion at the same time among food producers and food appreciators, just all on one street. And yet, I know from learning more about it and reading more about it, I don't think we're showing the video, there were many scales within the project because there were rehearsals and trainings and trainers and other types of intersections. And I was most impressed to find out that many of the guests attended because C2 and his crew knocked on their doors personally and invited them. Talking to someone at their doorstep is truly a lost art. Oh, it's me. Did you all want to say anything about that? Okay.
If I can take the liberty of quoting Jack Becker, because this was in print in Public Art Review a while back, about food as a metaphor for public art. There's junk food, there's organic, homegrown nourishment, then there are the strange-looking surprises on our plate. We don't know what they are, yet we try them. Like a big meal, some art takes time to fully digest. We consume our art and develop our tastes. We are what we eat.
So you'll be glad to know I only have 2 more projects about really difficult topics. And here's one of them. So this is called The Impossibility of Freedom in a Country Founded on Slavery and Genocide by the artist Dred Scott and commissioned by More Art. So Dred Scott, in most of his work, often pulls from the history of slavery and the civil rights movement. For this one, he wrote, in the performance, I made a Sisyphean attempt to walk forward while repeatedly battered and occasionally knocked down by a water jet from a fire hose. Dred Scott's performance, we'll look at it in a second, of this resistance is astonishing. The photos are one thing. Is the next one? Okay. I'm not sure if I should talk. The photos are one thing, but it's truly a kind of witnessing, which people clearly lined up to do. Okay, I'm just going to go back for a second here. So watching it is easy. It's easy to forget that it's a reenactment because it's such an experience in the present, and not just the performers present, but the viewers. Watching it, at risk of sounding like a dork, reminds me of the kind of thing they say in English, high school English textbooks, man against nature, man against water. You know, when he isolates the gesture like this, it's like a NASA test of G-force on the human body, except with water. But in the 1960s, the force of the fire hose was enough to separate bricks from mortar. And so, you know, it's helpful, since this is about this moment in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, that's what this, you know, performance is referencing. And he calls it a metaphor for a larger struggle for freedom. And he says it has inescapable references to present-day struggles against racism, most recently witnessed on the streets of Ferguson, and of course many more since Ferguson now. So the 1963 Birmingham campaign was considered the turning point in the civil rights movement. The images of the fire hoses and the police dogs being used against children generated national and international support for the movement. The Civil Rights Act was passed less than a year later, but public opinion, even in Alabama, was almost immediately on the side of the protesters once these images emerged and these actions came out. And so it's very interesting to pull this forward right now. I mean, I have different proposals about how that works, and I'm sure each person has their own interpretation. But there's already something as close as we can come to a consensus that Jim Crow segregation and its defense was a shameful collective national failure, and that the civil rights movement exemplified ordinary people behaving as heroically as any people we will ever see. And Bull O'Connor, who ordered the use of those hoses, Bull Connor, you know, was immediately pushed out of government. You know. So what does the exercise of violence in the 1960s civil rights demonstrations, you know, bring forward in the present? And I think this gesture is very open-ended. So these are some of the things that made me think about, and I'm going to be interested in hearing how other people feel about it later. Maybe it's reminding us that something as obviously wrong as Jim Crow segregation was once so natural and normal that it had to be overcome with superhuman, philosophical, spiritual, and physical engines of resistance. Maybe it's reminding us that poverty, policing, and prisons in the present could be and are being challenged as well. But the piece is called The Impossibility of Freedom in a Country Founded on Slavery and Genocide. So maybe Scott feels our attachment to our civil rights history deceives us with optimism. Or maybe that individual morals are no longer the issue in a system with structural racism and inequality. Or maybe he's applauding the many brave bodies on the line right now, every day. Another aspect to this that's so interesting to me is that this wasn't a solo performance. He worked with the fire department and performed with fire officials. He cooperated with city officials to reenact racism. And I don't think this is a meta performance, but maybe it is. And that reminded me that 2 days after the initial hosing of people in 1963, the Birmingham fire chief and firemen actually refused Bull Connor's orders to turn on the hoses again. And they just refused to do it. And Martin Luther King described that as a testament to the power of nonviolence. So as you can tell, this work makes me very anxious about the present and the past. And I think what it does most is heightens my fear of opportunity slipping away. And to me, that's the great achievement of the piece.
The next piece is USA Iran. It was part of curator Justine Topfer's exhibition Homeland for 5x5, which was a temporary public art project of the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities that was dedicated to exploring new perspectives on the District of Columbia through the lens of 5 curators and 25 artists. This was located on the facade of an abandoned library building, and the work brings attention to the abandoned Iranian embassy in Washington, D.C. where prior to the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the embassy was a site of artistic discussion and exchange, frequented by the likes of Elizabeth Taylor and Andy Warhol. The artist Sanaz Mazanani used the digital collages to evoke the geometric art that was part of some classic old institutions, the facades of classic old institutions. But in this case, she focused on universal themes of everyday life. You have to look at these images closely, and because the patterns are made up of mass media imagery, composed in parallels and contradictions. In one window, there's images of euphoric soccer fans from both Iran and America that form colorful fireworks of red, blue, green, and black. In another, there's an Iranian-American wrestler cling to one another, their forms forming a singular geometric entity. Mazanani laments the severed political and cultural ties between her homeland, Iran, and her adopted country, America. I think the theme of identity is running through a lot of visual art and performing arts and written arts these days. And this is one example of what temporary public work can communicate about that issue. The next project is our last building facade. And this is a piece by Rob Lay, and it's in Indianapolis. Let me find my note on this one. On the facade of a parking garage, those vast canvases that artists or programs are often drawn to have artists do something with to make them more attractive to the, well, I lost my note. More attractive to the building. In this case, Rob was influenced by nature, which is no surprise that, there's artists like Ned Kahn and Christian Moeller, who both have dealt with these large expanses of parking garage facades and have turned to nature as inspiration to soften those harsh edges. What's different here is sort of the use of color and how Rob used the materials to create sort of undulating experience as you go past this building. So you get the general idea of, how many different views you can get from this project. And it's a lot, you probably see some similarities to what Ned Kahn has done in the past with his discs that undulate in the wind and reflect light. And this is a bit denser than that and a bit more undulating and, well, it doesn't move at all, actually, but it's a more textured surface.
Okay, we are now at the last project we're going to introduce, but you see it's actually many projects in one. So how many people here have actually seen in person at large A Wee Wee on Alcatraz? Okay, so you're all much better people than I am because I am a complete loser and haven't seen it. And to make matters worse, I'm going to talk about it. I think we'll conclude by all three of us commenting on this because at least one of us has actually seen it also. But I'll just describe briefly each room because each room is sort of its own public sculpture. So this colossal undertaking to transform the public space of Alcatraz was done by AWWE with the Foresight Foundation. Alcatraz has separate legacies as a military fortress, an infamous federal prison, and a site of Native American occupation. Now it's a state park. National park. A vocal critic of the Chinese government, A was detained by authorities for 81 days in 2011. And as the project description puts it, these sculptural, sound, and mixed media installations turned the iconic prison into a space for dialogue about freedom of expression and human rights. With this project, A aims to expand our understanding of, quote, the purpose of art, which is the fight for freedom. He has embraced the ironies of creating site-specific art for a place he couldn't see, and of celebrating free expression while working under extreme constraints. So these installations are a feat of the imagination and the will, especially since he conceived of them and installed them from another country. There's 5 components, and I'll briefly introduce each one by excerpting from the project text. So With Wind is in the New Industries building. Both delicate and fearsome, the traditional Chinese dragon kite embodies a mythical symbol of power. He says that for him, the dragon represents not imperial authority, but personal freedom. Everybody has this power. The individual kites that make up the dragon's body carry quotations from activists who have been imprisoned or exiled, including Nelson Mandela and Edward Snowden. And then Trace is in the rear of the New Industries building. Oh, sorry, that's not Trace. That's Trace. The viewer is confronted with a field of colorful images laid out flat across the expansive floor. Portraits of 176 people who have been imprisoned or exiled because of their beliefs or affiliations, most still incarcerated. Each image was built from Legos. I think there's a close-up of it.
No.
Oh, there's not a close-up of it, sorry. Okay. The past and present are united in the figure of the political dissident. This is me, not the text. And yet each are carefully historicized in a book of information describing the biographical and historical context of their incarceration or exile. So Refraction is in the lower gun gallery of the New Industries building, and this is where armed guards once monitored prisoners at work. Visitors peer through cracked and rusted windows to glimpse the enormous metal wing on the floor below. In place of feathers, the artwork bristles with reflective panels originally used on solar cookers in Tibet, a region that has long struggled under Chinese rule. Like With Wind on the floor above, this piece uses the imagery of flight to evoke the tension between freedom, be it its physical, political, or creative freedom, and confinement. Okay, and finally, Stay Tuned is a sound installation that occupies 12 cells. So inside each cell, visitors are invited to sit and listen to spoken words, poetry, and music by people who have been detained for the creative expression of their beliefs, as well as works made under conditions of incarceration. So it includes Tibetan singer Lolo, who's called for his people's independence from China, Pussy Riot, and the Robben Island Singers. Oh, and there's one more. This is Yours Truly. Oh, sorry. It's the first one. Yours Truly is in the dining hall, and this offers visitors the opportunity to correspond directly and personally with individual prisoners. More than 58,000 postcards have been sent to prisoners of conscience around the world. So through materials and design, these spaces illustrate the tension between absolute power, human frailty, and collective strength. You can see the crushing weight of the state against the breathing room of people living out their own historical moments with resolution and courage. I found it really amazing how sensitive the materials in each of these sculptures are and how each collectively produced and or crafted each is collectively produced and/or crafted into symbols of unleashed freedom. So the Lego portraits made in the form of political resistors, a wing that weighs 5 tons, and a dragon that represents the infinite energy left when everything else is taken away from you. Maybe I should pass the mic to someone who's seen it.
You know, it was thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people travel to Alcatraz annually. And I think that, of course, there are intentional visitors to go see the Ai Weiwei installation, which is why I went. And then I think there were people who were at Alcatraz who had no idea this was there and were trying to reconcile this artwork in the prison. Because when you come in, you get your earphones and you listen to a long guided tour of Alcatraz and its history. And nothing, you know, it doesn't get interspersed with any information about Ai Weiwei's installation. So you're kind of mesmerized by that history. And then you just have to take these detours and go and see some of his work. I thought the most moving were the singular cells that you could walk into and sit on a stool located in the middle and hear the artist reading their poem, singing their song, in the case of Martin Luther King, giving a speech. And so you're very alone in that experience. And then, of course, then you have that other layer of what was it like for, you know, all the prisoners that lived there, and you see these remnants of human existence in this prison as well. So many layers of experience going through that. And the new industries building that featured the kites and the Lego and the portraits of the prisoners, that was open to the public for the first time because of this installation. So people were able to really see a lot of Alcatraz during this time. And you also can imagine what it was like to try and plan this installation with Ai Weiwei, who couldn't even be here, but they did it through Skype. So as they were installing the work, if there were issues, they could communicate with him via Skype and do some problem solving in that way. But I thought the exhibition did a great job in terms of providing some background video. There weren't any docents or anything like that, but just very moving overall experience.
Yeah, this really, when I see this piece, and I start to recall the stories that my parents had told me about not being able to go back to China when the communists had taken over. And they raised 4 kids here in this country. And we take this for granted, all 4 of us take it for granted. And this is just another way to remember and to realize how the world has changed and how little it has changed as well. So this has really been an incredible experience for me to be able to go through this process of all of these pieces, 340 some submittals, to come to this 30 pieces that we've just described to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie, Peggy, and Lori Jo. You guys were amazing. That was a phenomenal job you guys did. So now after that experience, it's time for lunch. During this time is when we can go and sign up for the tours. Outside in the foyer, there's a table with the tickets. You can go and select your tours. Just a note, all the tours depart from the Sheraton Chicago entrance and lobby of this building, so one flight down and out. So I think that's it. All right, see you guys all in a bit.